want you to do. And I'm like, what? Now, this is after all my family said, this is your business. You know how us people are. What goes on in our house stays in our house. It don't go outside these doors. Well, you know what? This is not about me. This is about something that's affecting our whole community. It ain't about my children. Well, it is about my children because my children could be infected. It can't get infected. They're not infected, they are affected. And like I used to tell them, you know what? You don't know if you got a classmate in you that's got a mother, sister, brother, cousin that's dealing with the same thing. HIV does not discriminate. It doesn't care who you are, how old you are, what race, creed, religion you are. It's out there. And I always say HIV looks like me and it looks like each one of you out there. And it does not discriminate. And when he told me that he wanted me to do something, and my family was like, no, 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 no. And I remember going to one of my support groups, and they were saying, well, we need a woman to talk about this disease. And they said, we're going to screen your face and everything. We want to let them know who you is. I'm like, oh, man, this is what he wanted me to do. So I said, okay, I'll do it. But by the time the news cameraman people got there, they said, well, we want a face of this disease. I'm like, oh, Lord, now you're killing me. I mean, what is my family going to say? But you know what? I had to be obedient. I had to be obedient. And I had to put the word out there. Yes, HIV is there, out here. And that particular day, one of my dear friends rode in on a big bus. You know those medical buses? That's what she rode in on. She was a person that worked at Kodak and made this little glass eye for Cinderella, whomever it might be, and whatever. She just was a very prominent person in Kodak, and had an arranged marriage. Her mother picked her husband out. Well, neither did they know that her husband was an IV drug user, and also HIV infected. Well, this young lady died. But that particular day, she came into our support group. They rolled her in a wheelchair. And I knew what time it was. She was a big, healthy, strong young lady. Till she dribbled up to this one person with this shades on, with this glasses on. I didn't know who she was at first. Death was looking me in my face once again. And when they asked me what was my group about, it was about death and dying. Because I seen death looking at me once again. And what do I do with this? I had to keep praying for my salvation. Because I can't do nothing for anybody else but mine. I have to pray for me. And let me tell you, it's very heart-wrenching to see what people have to go through. The deterioration of your mind, your body, and your soul.
Yeah.
It hurts. You know why? Because you know what? It could have been me.
Amen.
It could have been me. And I thank God every day that it's not me. But you know what? I'm not exempt from this. Because like Pat Sanders says, who knows what tomorrow's hold? Tomorrow's a whole nother day.
That's right.
And all I can do is constantly say, thank you, Lord.
Oh, yes.
And I just thank God for the support that I have of my church members, my family, my friends, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be standing here today.
Yeah.
Because people need support. They need to feel loved. They don't need to be feel like they're ostracized, they're less than.
Right.
Because we are all people.
Right.
And we all deserve the utmost respect, and no matter what the situation is. I know I'm almost done. I just got this one more thing to say. I can remember when I was last in the hospital, this young lady, she was in the hospital before I got there, and she was very, very sick. She probably weighed 80 pounds soaking wet, if that. I was in the hospital, and they told me that she said hello. And I'm like, oh, she must be feeling better. I walked into her room when I was getting ready to get discharged. And when I walked in that room, I didn't see what I expected to see. This young lady was laying in her bed, and everything had stopped but her heart. She was dead. And when I walked in that room, I ran out like I was running for my life. And I was. Because it scared the life out of me. And what I had to do, I had to gather myself, and I had to go back in that room, and I had to apologize to her, whether she knew I was there or not. Because you know what? That could have been me.
Right.
And would I want somebody running from me? No. And I held her. And that night she died. Well, she was waiting for her mother to come there. Her mother came, and her 2 grandchildren was born. And there is life after death, and I know that. But we have to lift each other up, keep each other strong. Because HIV is all of our issue.
Yeah.
We all have to deal with this. And if we're not infected, we are affected some kind of way. And we need to. I remember I was at Blanca at the beginning of Blanca. I remember when we marched down Hudson Avenue. We marched down Joseph Avenue. We was getting the word out about HIV and getting tested in our communities. That's what we need again. We need to bring it back.
All right.
Thank you. Any questions? No? No? Okay. No questions?
Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Give her another hand, please. This time we're going to ask Dr. Sanders to come back to the podium, and we're going to bring up our panel, Dr. Myrick, Dr. White, Dolores Sampson. Ask you to come and take your positions up here, and we're going to open up for some Q&A time. We've just been truly blessed, and I think my sister, Mrs. Chambers, she at the end, I think she just brought it home. She really brought it home. I am. But she told you how she learned to live. And that's what we want to do here. Learn how to live. And also she said, what about we have to start walking the streets of Rochester once again and bringing this message to the people. And that's what this affiliate will do in the coming time that I'm the chairperson. We'll do that work. Good job.
All right. Well, first, let me just take a moment. I know we want to do Q&A, but Dr. White, Reverend White, who you heard earlier, is here with us. Dolores Simpson, who I've been blessed to work with, and then the Reverend Myrick is here with us also. There are 3 themes. Reverend White is going to talk for a moment about human sexuality in the clergy, and you entertain questions that we might have in that regard. Reverend Myrick is going to talk about concerns of clergy addressing HIV/AIDS, and then Reverend Simpson is going to respond to questions regarding best practices. All right?
Amen.
So, I tell you, why don't we just go in the order that we're seated? So I'm going to ask Reverend Myrick if he'll go first.
Amen. Certainly, I feel honored to be here this day. I am very grateful for what has taken place, because today has been an empowerment for me as a pastor. I am truly grateful for the knowledge that has been shared here today, and I believe we as ministers, this type of venue helps us to be more equipped, to be able to talk with our parishioners in regards to this disease that is facing our community today. I believe no longer can the church and we as ministers turn our backs and refuse to address the issues that is at hand. This issue has been among us for a long time, and now that we are more in tune to it, it's time for us to start speaking up and letting the community know that we as pastors, as clergy, as members of God's family, we will no longer stay silent on this issue. We will speak up and speak out. And then too, we have to be encouragers of those who have been affected. We can no longer talk about those people anymore, because those people are our people. That's right. And what affect them affect us.
That's right.
And so we have to be more in tune as far as gaining knowledge. You know, knowledge is said to be power. Amen. And so the more we know, the more we can help each other. Yeah. And then too, I think we need to learn how to network with one another, because there are some things that I might not know that I can talk with Pastor Sanders here. He can help me, Pastor White, Reverend Simpson, and we can help each other. This is a collaborative effort that we're not long rangers on this at all. So we're in this thing together, and together we will stand on this issue and then be brave enough to speak out from the pulpit. And then we need to teach this more in our churches and educate our people so that they too can educate others on this issue. Amen.
Amen. Pastor White?
All right, I'm going to be brief with this, but this is something I will say to you that I said to my daughters. I have 5 girls. I don't have no boys. Don't start crying. God didn't have but one son. He gave you. It's all right. We had a wonderful time. we enjoyed each other. But you have to lay the truth on the table as best as you know how, to your knowledge and understanding of what truth is. That's the only way you're going to be free. I said to my oldest daughter when she was about 6, 7 years old, I said, now I'm going to tell you the truth. Now I want you to listen to me. Before one of your big mouth aunties come by, one of your nephews, and tell you what happened. You was born a year before me and your mother got married, okay? And the back seat of a 56 Ford, and that's why I tell you, you can't handle yourself back there. When they got to be 15, I reiterated that. You ain't getting back there because you can't handle yourself. See, now how do you get 5 girls out of high school and into college? All of them went to college. And they asked me that at the school one night. I said, how did you do that? And none of them got pregnant. I said, you have to drive a hard bargain. You don't need children if you can't say no.
Thank you.
See, because there's times when you got to say no based upon your own experience. All right, now let's just tie to the knowledge of God, and I'm finished. God created us, and He knew how He made us. Man had the commandment to reproduce and replenish the earth before he sinned, before he lost that relationship with God. That was already in him. So how do you control something that God puts in you? Your nature becomes bad, and now you're on the other side of God. Well, you have to come back to what Jesus said. You have to be born again. And then once you're born again, you mortify the deeds of the body. Now, what am I talking about? That deer that got hit on the road last night, he's laying there today, and he looks pretty good. But if you come back by there by Thursday afternoon or Friday, his leg is going to begin to rise and he's going to swell, see? And then he'll get to a certain point and his flesh will begin to melt down and that leg will go back down. Now, he's not coming back. Jesus is the only man that ever came to this earth and raised somebody whose flesh had started to mortify. That was Lazarus. That's what makes this miracle so great and outstanding, because when Lazarus came to the cave of that door, he was still bound. And Jesus said, loose him and let him go. See, which means he was still bound. So all I'm saying to you is you got to go back to Romans 8:9. That's why there's no condemnation to them that in Christ Jesus.
Nothing.
If we through the Spirit do mortify, now let's go back to what he was saying today. And I let's see, if you'd have hollered, I'd have hollered behind you. We're not debtors to the flesh to live after the flesh, for if we live after the flesh, we shall die. But if we through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, you can live. Human sexuality is as much a part of your makeup as your five senses is. See, God gave it to us. If a man didn't have a desire for a woman, there wouldn't be no production here. I wouldn't be here if my father hadn't had a desire for my mother.
All right.
But now that it's went out of control, part of preaching is to bring it back into control.
Amen.
But supposedly it don't come back, then you're going to need a blood covering. You're going to need some grace.
Amen.
That don't mean God going to throw you out because he laid a way of escape for you, see. Now, I know Paul said, don't let it once be named among you as becoming sins. But if David and a whole lot of them other fellas fell and God put their name in the book, he didn't erase it out. See, he didn't make it look like they was born perfect, because they wasn't. And you and I got to sit in that same chair. Don't make it look like our children into this congregation that we were born separate, because we got some skeletons in the closet we don't want nobody to know about. See, no. Am I finished with it?
You're all right.
We got to be real. That's right. You can't handle yourself in the back seat of a car and you 50. Come on. All right, now what makes you think a teenager can do that and take time to prepare themselves? Yeah. I tell my daughters, man, there's some jitterbugs make you throw that thing out the window. Listen, you got to be truthful with them and hope that they will catch the truth and then rely on God to make the difference. Amen. Your sexuality is a part of your makeup, just like eating and everything else. If God didn't give you an appetite, you couldn't eat. Now, how did I know that? I had a quadruple bypass in 06. Lost my appetite to eat. I tell my wife I want a hamburger, and when she make it, I'm sorry, honey, I just don't have a taste for it. I lost 20-something pounds, and I came to the conclusion I better start eating because I see food, not because I'm hungry. Okay. And that's what got me by it. I started eating because she said it there. And I knew I had to eat or I'm going to lose my strength. Your sexuality is a part of your divine makeup. Now, don't blame God for the sinful use of it. That's where the enemy steps in there. Amen. Therefore, you have to be responsible for your actions. Somebody say, how did you get out of it? Just a personal word. I'm from Georgia, and so, I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and I say this. My father married the first time. His first wife, he had 9 children. And I learned 2 years ago that while he, between his first wife and my mother, there was a lady named Jewel who had one called Victoria. So that makes 10. My mother had 2, and he was 28 years older than she was. But don't knock young men and old women, because Keturah was a whole lot younger than Sarah. I'm messing with him, I'm just messing with him. All right. So don't knock these old men and these young women. It's in the Bible. All right. So there was 22 of us. I was the first one, 14 out of 14 boys, I was the first one to finish high school. And all I'm saying to you is, when you're in a situation, you better hope that God has a plan for you. And to the lady the sister who just gave that testimony, that's beautiful. When you learn how to live with until, now you got the victory, because the man of patience will stand. And that's what we have to come to. We have to learn how to live with until. Right. Until they find a cure, you're gonna have to learn how to live with it.
Yeah.
All right. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Dr. White. Brother Simpson.
I have, and first of all, I thank God for just being able to be here. I thank God for Block on all the endeavor. And was it a long time? But I thank God for people. I thank God for a community. I thank God for a church, just where I can be a servant, just to do what God has called for me to do. And I have what we call the best practice. Now, coming from a preacher, the best practice that I know now that I'm saved, sanctified, and Holy Ghost filled with His precious Holy Ghost is to abstain. But, there's a but. There's a conjunction but in there. We have to go that way, but we can't all do that. I didn't do it in the beginning. I'm doing it in the end, but I didn't do it in the beginning. I've sinned and I've fallen short of the glory of God. I had sex. But in the midst of having sex, when you have a community and you show love, this word says the best practice. If I love you, I won't hurt you. I won't spread to you what I have. Y'all hear what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am.
I won't spread to you what I have. You have to teach. You have to teach, and you teach it from the Word of God, and you teach it from your mouth. If you know you can get sick, if you know you can get sick, and the church and all the community, everybody's raising the banner saying, HIV is out there. HIV is a killer. It's just like cancer is a killer. You're going to use something or whatever you can use to stop the spread. I'm talking about the spread now because I'm called to do the best practice. And let's be honest, the best practice is do whatever you can to stop the spread from hurting someone else. You teach your children that person that you think that you love at 14, 12, and 13, that person may be HIV. You teach them and you train them. The best thing for you to do is not to have sex. But when mom and dad aren't around, we don't know what they're doing. We hope they're not doing it, because when my mom and dad wasn't around, but you train and teach them, that person can have HIV. You've got to be careful. You've got to use protection. I mean, we got to be honest. Because see, there's a law that came out because of, just let me show you this. The law of the red stoplight law had to come out. Now they're going to catch you and give you a ticket if you run through the red light. Well, we had gotten laxy-daisy, mundane, because we bypassed the yellow light. When you see that yellow light coming, you're supposed to stop. It's automatic. It had gotten a mundane thing. When you see that red light coming, you're supposed to stop. But we had gotten to the practice of when you see the yellow light, you're going to speed up. And a lot of times you speed up, you're running a red light. And you don't know who's coming. And after a while, we as drivers, we get to the point when we see that caution light, we stop, but we don't start off because we know somebody may be running the light. You understand? Somebody may be breaking the law. Yeah. See, we're going to break some laws. We're going to break some law, but God's law is in us. And when you have Jesus in you, you can fulfill that law. I'm not going to hurt Reverend Sister Dixon. I'm not going to hurt her because I love her. I have the love of God in me. I'm not going to hurt Dr. Sanders. I'm not going to hurt people. So if I know that I've got HIV, I'm not going to spread it around. I'm not going to hand it out. I'm going to let people know, yes, I have HIV. I'm going to get tested. I'm going to do everything that I can to keep this disease contained, but thank God for the healing. Do y'all understand what I'm talking about?
Yes.
See, the thing of what we're here today for, because it's spreading. Come on, somebody. The best practice, it's because it's spreading. Who's spreading it? It ain't spreading through the air. It ain't spreading through a toilet stool. It ain't spreading because you kiss somebody. It's spreading because we're being permissive. You know what I'm saying? Or you're spreading because the bloods, they don't check the blood now. They don't check the bloods. Mostly when you take IVs and stuff, that blood is, you don't get that contaminated blood anymore. But it's spreading without, all I'm trying to say is spreading through us as a people. Us as a race, us as a culture. It's spreading through us. We can annihilate ourselves. So we've got to, if you don't want to obey, come on now, if you don't want to obey God's law and sustain, then you do the best practice. You protect yourself and you protect that person. Why do you do it? Because I love that person.
Yes.
That young boy that may have it, and he got a relationship with a young girl, he's supposed to let her know, I'm HIV. He ain't just supposed to spread it from one person to every partner he get. Run out there. Even in the prisons, if you marry somebody, let me show you this. If you're married to somebody and you want to have conjugal relationship, a house of relationship, you have to take it. That woman has to take an HIV test, and he has to take an HIV test so it doesn't spread. And if he's got HIV, you will not have a visit. And I know 3 women that found out that the man that they married, who was in prison, is HIV. 3. I knew. They told me. They found out when they did the test, because you don't have it. But I'm just saying, it's just simple. If you don't want to obey the law of God, that moral law, then we got to start obeying the law of the land, and we as a people got to stop spreading it.
Amen.
So how do we stop spreading it? We stop spreading it with love, and we're going to protect, and we're going to shut this disease down. So that, stop it. We're going to shut it down. Right. And we're the only ones, as a people of God, we got to say it loud and clear all over our church. Y'all shut it down. That's right. Shut it down. Just like we shut down, say no more violence, no more HIV, because it ain't going to come from me. Amen. Amen.
All right, shut it down. All right. It's really interesting. As you were talking, I remembered the words from my good friend James K. Hildreth. He's one of the great African American researchers in HIV/AIDS. He does work with microbicides, trying to develop barrier shields for women to use without having to seek or negotiate relationships with a partner. But James Hildreth always says, there are 3 things you can be sure human beings are going to do. Human beings are always going to drink water. They are always going to eat food, and they are always going to have sex.
Amen.
There you go.
He said you can be sure of that. That's as sure as there's breath in our bodies. Those 3 things human beings are going to do. And I think that one of the things that we have to appreciate is how to begin to talk about this more. I'm convinced that these messages have to come from the pulpit. Now, let me tell you, when and then people tell me all the time that I'm always finding ways to talk about issues of sexuality in sermons. But I look for ways to talk about sexuality in sermons because it does not get addressed forthrightly enough. As a matter of fact, I'll give you one right now in light of what Dr. Hildreth told me. Not long ago, I preached that story, which all of us know, of the Samaritan woman that Jesus encounters by the well. That story is about water, food, and sex.
That's right.
Water, food, and sex.
That's what the whole story is about. Think about it. Everything in that story is about water, food, and sex.
That's it.
Right?
Drink.
Now, we have to be the ones who are willing to learn to deal with the text forthrightly enough to be able to point to how it is these things. The first thing is you have to develop a comfort level in terms of talking about issues of sexuality. Most of us are not comfortable in talking about our own personal sexuality. There's this language, LGBTQ. You all know that?
No, tell them what that means.
LGBTQ. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, RQ, okay, and Q. Well, let me just tell you this now, so you can get this right. LGBTQ.
LBGT.
All right. Then let me help you on that Q, because I don't want to see y'all go out there and get in trouble. Because it's really the Q I want to talk about. I'm really not talking as much about the LGB and T. I want to talk about the Q. The first thing you need to know is that Q can mean either queer or it can mean questioning. I would advise you to know that Q is one of those familial terms. As much as I dislike the familial use of the N-word in our community, it still exists. All right? Now, I try my best not to say that word.
Amen.
But it is real, and we know how often it gets used. But when something is a familial term, that means that somebody else who is like you can say it. So somebody else might say that N-word to you, and you don't completely blow up. You might be much more philosophical about saying, let me tell you why we should not use that word. But you let somebody white say that word to you, and you instantly become outraged to the point of acting out. But the reason why you accept it from a black person is familial. Well, that's the way the word queer is in relationship to people who are LGBT. And that is, they will, allow that to be said, but even then, there'll be some question. But this is the point I want to make to you, is not the word, not the Q as being queer, but the Q as being questioning. Good research tells us that LGBT only represents less than 10% of the entire population of our society. LGBT represents no more than 10%, and most people say it's only 7 or 8% of those who are in our society. But Q represents 50%, which means that, I'm not going to ask you to count off in this room, right? But I would have you to say that Q is an issue. Let me tell you what Q means. That not that you're LGBT, but it means that you're questioning. And it's amazing how much in our churches and in our communities, because we don't talk about sexuality and understand what that means as a gift from God that we have. I mean, the idea that we have framed sexuality in a way that instantly represents a negative. Just even think about how people talk about sex in the community and the language of sex in the community. Young people, they're talking about doing the nasty. And
you're right.
What's the other one?
Generations.
Bumping and grinding and all that. But the thing is, the language reflects how we think. And what we look at over against realizing that, it's a gift from God. It's intended to not only translate into procreation, but as you remember, some of us who were in the training with Dr. Wyatt, I think she made a very persuasive philosophical, physiological argument when she said that clearly it's intended for pleasure also. Sometimes in the church we kind of act like there's no reason to have sex except for procreation. And that's not true. That's not true. If you all remember, Dr. Wyatt, she was the first one that I ever heard make that point that way. She talked to us like we were adults who needed to be able to talk to people. And she said that physiologically, the only reason why she could figure out that God created a woman with a clitoris was for her to be able to have pleasure. Because it has nothing to do with reproduction. That's right. And I thought that was a very persuasive. We spent some time talking kind of openly and forthrightly about these things in some of our collaborative sessions that we worked on together. So I guess what we have to be able to be the ones is to be able to frame, the understanding for all of us, not just young people, for all of us in a way that we can see the business of who we are as sexual beings in a fashion that does not undermine our ability to be able to see the joy and the God-intended purpose for that dimension of who we are.
Pastor,
yes.
I think one of the reasons because there's such a problem, because it's been so perverted, and so people don't know what it's like in its right context.
Well, yeah, I think that.
Sex is just
But let's be real. It's not something that's new. It's very clear that you can look throughout all of history, and see evidence that the issue of sexuality has always been problematic.
That's right.
And I think that one of the things that we have to appreciate is that we are no different. If you look at the history, it's a very compelling history. You can go all the way back to the point that you can go back to cave drawings and some of the earliest, graphic expression of human life you can find and there are images of sexual, relations that are depicted. So I think that one of the things that we have to do is to be able to bring the positive. As a matter of fact, I would like to think that maybe we are progressing instead of digressing. I think it's probably been worse. It's amazing the things that I see. At least a couple of hands here and then there. Okay.
I would also like to add that we have to also take, I don't know who asked that question, but we as clergy have to take ownership of demonizing sexuality
Right.
from the pulpit.
That's right.
I think we really have to be really honest
Right.
and take ownership around that.
Right. Too many of us equate sex with sin.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
and so
And that's-
when we talk about this whole notion of it being, perverted, we've attributed to that conversation, and I think we really have to separate it out and really get at what sexuality is.
I'm gonna go back here first, and then Dr. White, one of our panelists, wants to respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I agree with you that it has to come from the pulpit, but I just wanted to make some clarity on what Reverend Simpson was saying earlier about the best practices. I think the message from the pulpit has got to be get tested, because it's proven in our field that once a person knows their status, their behavior changes. The majority of the people that are HIV positive don't know their status. And that's the scary part. And that's all I can tell you from the people I see when I'm out there testing. They don't know their status.
Right.
It's just like Saturday, we were out there, we got out there at 1 o'clock.
Right.
It took us almost 3 hours to get one person to start testing before the rest of them would test.
They're scared.
Yeah. I think that's one of our takeaways from today, you all, is this business of getting tested.
Amen.
Because
That's
I think
it.
we've heard that in at least
That's
4 or
right.
5 presentations today. And that statistic that you just made reference to, that 1/2 of the people who are infected do not know that they're infected because they have not been tested. So I think we have to be the ones. But even with testing, who was it that said earlier how traumatized they were?
Well, I was going to share that with
By the idea of getting tested,
I had
yeah.
a talk with a minister, because I sit with the Rochester Area Task Force on AIDS down at the AIDS Institute as well. And I talked to a minister about why he never got tested. And it's because he said he was scared of what he did in his past.
Yes.
That has kept him from getting tested, because he didn't want to know. But I told him, until you step up and get tested in front of you, let your congregation know
Right.
it's all right to be tested. They're not going to test because they're
Right.
following you.
As we always say, everybody's got a status. The issue is, do you know yours? That's the issue. Dr. White, you want to say something?
In this world today now I'm thinking that must have been 64, 65 before we had our first television, little black and white about like that. And good thing you was young, because otherwise you wouldn't need a binoculars to see it. But in this time and day, by the time your child is 5 years old, they've been around the world and have seen most everything that you didn't sense here. Now, with that kind of knowledge being spread, don't let an opportunity pass. If you're in the book of Genesis and the Sunday school lesson say, and Adam knew his wife, explain to your adult class what knew mean. And you can't pass them opportunities by, because if you do, and like your children, I'd rather them hear it from me than to hear it from anybody else, because I'm going to tell you the truth about it.
Teach
Now,
him.
Dr. White, when you say in your adult class now, I think we would agree on the fact, though, this is a conversation that has to start pretty young.
It does.
Yeah, and we have to develop the ability and the sophistication to talk to our young people as well. This thing now about the incidence of pregnancies, in still single-digit kids, 9 years old and the like.
Right. It's
Much
getting worse.
less, 10, 11, 12, 13. It's
getting
real.
worse. It's real.
And I think that
It's
one of the
getting
things,
worse.
and the other thing that I know, and I'm sure you remember this, because I know even in, I'm not gonna leave you alone on Blackshear, Georgia, but even in Blackshear, Georgia, I know what y'all were talking about
Yeah. Well,
when you were 11, 12, 13 years old.
well, now this is where I'm going.
understand
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Now,
yeah.
I know you're old enough to remember little Jimmy Dickens because you're talking about country music.
Well,
Yeah. You remember that?
I know little Jimmy.
Yeah. You remember that song he said about I got my education out behind the barn?
Yeah.
And he wasn't talking about ABC.
That's
you
right,
see.
that's right. That's right.
We don't need to learn it out behind the
That's right.
barn.
Don't need to learn behind the barn, but also when you think about it, because a lot of times we always get this thing, and you know, now I'm 63 now, and I'm amazing how much those of us of that baby boomer generation like to suggest that it's something that's happening with our young, you know, they talk about hip hop music and all that, but I just remind you to go back and listen to the Funkadelics, and go back and listen to the Isley Brothers. It's your thing. Do what you want to do. Love the one you with. If you can't love the one. You love the one you with. I mean,
And don't put Otis Redding in there, Solomon Burke.
Sexual healing. I mean, you know, so all I'm saying to you is that, you know, we are very much a part of, and we also, look, let me tell you what happened in our generation, you all, and it's a part of what we do. The consequences, who we are, we have to deal with that. Two dramatic things that happened in our generation. One was birth control. You know, it used to be the only thing we were concerned about in having sex was don't get pregnant.
That's right.
You know, in our
How do I stop
congregation
from getting
today,
pregnant?
I am a lot less distressed over the issue of a young woman being pregnant in terms of the fact that she was having sex and that the partner was another young person. I'm more distressed about the fact that obviously there was not a knowledge level that meant that there was not protected sex. I mean, I would like to think that it did
Amen.
not happen, you know, but the fact is, when you're pregnant, you know it did. But having a child, I'm convinced that in the final analysis, you know, God will make life what we can't imagine it being.
That's right.
You know, but I don't know if any of you ever heard Jesse Jackson tell that story about being born to a teenage unwed mother. But he said it was a teacher who he heard say to him one day that she wanted him to learn how to speak English properly, because she said, who knows, one day you might grow up and be the president, and I don't want you to be embarrassing me splitting verbs and not knowing how to talk. You know, he said, so the fact he was born to a teenage mother had nothing to do with the fact that somebody else told him he might be president. That's right. You know, but all I'm saying to you is that we life is life. Once it's here, it's here. But the fact is, we ought to be concerned about the fact that if you're not sufficiently emotionally or otherwise prepared for parenthood, then we still ought to be trying to nurture in our children
Amen.
an appreciation for that to happen at a time in your life when you
Amen.
can best cope with it and deal with it.
That's right.
But if it does happen at another point,
We got to.
then we have an obligation to own the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child, and all of us need to be about the business of supporting the life of that child. I guess for me, one of the things that gets to be so important is that somewhere along the way we have lost a sense of communal responsibility. Whenever, and this is just one of my things in ministry, all right? Whenever a conflict occurs between, it's only happened one time. One time in 30 years at Metropolitan Church has there been a physical confrontation between two members. But there have been a number of instances when there's been pregnancies and there have been other things that happen. Whenever anything happens in our congregation, my first question is, what is it that I have not done that did not create an atmosphere in which this kind of thing might not have happened? Not what they did, she did, he did. If somebody 13 years old at Metropolitan Church ends up pregnant, I'm ready to call an education committee meeting and say, you all, we are missing the mark. Yeah. And in too many instances, we're not dealing forthrightly with the issues. I mean, it's like what Reverend Simpson said, you know, and I'm going to say this kind of sarcastically. Maybe I shouldn't with the camera running, but I'll say it like this. He said, you know, abstain, but, okay, I would suggest that you can spell that B-U-T or B-U-T-T, because in both ways, it ends up being the issue.
Okay.
You pick that out when you get home later, all right? But I mean, just think about the things that, oh, wait, now, did y'all grow up with me? Do you remember singing a song and doing a dance called Doing the Butt?
That's right.
Doing the monkey.
You know.
All night long.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe you all led sheltered lives and were not exposed to such things. So all I'm saying is that the butt is real.
That's right.
You know, so abstain, but if you do, make sure you know that, you know, the condoms do have a very high degree of effectiveness in terms of controlling, you know. As a matter of fact, I have done consultations with people in the prophylactic industry. I mean, it's amazing the research that goes into the development of barrier protections. And then the other thing is people don't want to have open conversation. What I'm saying is you got to get to be where you're honest. It's amazing to me that I've had some people, I've gotten them to the conversation where you'll say something like, you know, everyone should use a condom. And folks will start hearing you on condoms, right? But you can be doing the same sex education class and then reach over and pick up a package of dental dam and say, now this you need to learn how, people talk.
What is that?
You don't do that, do you? Uh-oh, Rev Simpson. You didn't say you didn't know, did you? Oh, well.
So you know what's interesting is I was going to say part of the work is that we don't know how to talk about those things and how to use them properly.
You got some dental dam over there? All right. All right. Now, I'm going to let you figure out what it's for. All right, but anyway.
My threshold package ain't no joke.
Yeah, but that's real talk.
Oh, does it? Okay. Oh, well, that's great, y'all. Well, I don't have to explain. You get this back when you get to.
No, you do have to explain. No, really, real talk. That's part of the issue, is that men are putting on condoms and they're putting them on incorrectly, and then when they burst, then we wonder why. Folks who don't know how to use dental dams are not using them properly, and I will do a demonstration for you.
Well, you know you don't need to do this. Well, let me just tell you, you don't need to do this with black people, because black people don't do this.
Yeah.
Have you heard that before? Haven't you heard that before?
Once they know how to do it, they want to do it.
Right. And we know that's not correct.
Did I say something?
Right.
Just let's forget it.
Now Rev Simpson said, let's just forget it, right? Well, let me tell you.
I'm only joking, I'm only joking.
Okay. I promised today I wasn't gonna say nothing. I was just gonna come here and listen.
You've been quiet all day.
But see, you're getting to the real root of the issue.
Yes, that's it. I'm only
If
joking.
the ministers, Blanca is headed by ministers.
Yeah, that's right.
No.
I just was true.
If the ministers can't sit around and have a conversation about this thing openly,
That's right.
how are you going to ever develop a place where you can talk to your people from the pulpit about it?
Amen. That's true. You got to know what you're talking about. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Some of the people who do them demonstrations come in and do demonstrations.
I just do what I do. We don't got time now.
Let me tell you this, for all of you in this room, Blanca and its leadership are part of a collaborative where once a month we have the conversation. You know, it's really interesting. It's really interesting that it's taken us 5 hours to get down to the real conversation. This is the real conversation right now, right? You see what I'm saying? Right. You're right, my brother. You're right, my brother. So we have established a conversation.
We just not getting it.
Okay. But you know what? But let me tell you what happens though. This is important.
You can laugh.
With Mrs. Dixon, Reverend Dixon. Mrs. Reverend Dixon.
I love to call her that. I love to call her that.
But let me tell you what I think is good about the way this happened, though. Right? It is good to increase the knowledge before you jump into the conversation.
That's right. That's right.
Because a lot of times,
you don't know what you be talking
the
about.
uninformed conversation will have you going down some strange roads. That's right. But then there's a point at which, you know, because we've been here long enough today, we've heard the facts. We've had some wonderful, wonderful first person experience. You know, I mean, you know, Sister Chambers just. You know, just gave out of her heart for us to be able to hear what we're going on, right? You think about everything we've done today. Pastor Dixon talked. Sister Clark came in and gave us the epidemiological data. Sister Chapman, you know, helped us to be able to talk about a continuation of the work that's going on. Sister Odom. You think about all the people's voices we've heard today. It brings us to this moment to be able to talk more openly and more freely and more well-informed, and then as well as it allows us to be able to fill in the blanks.
Educate.
Yeah, educate.
Yes.
Because I know you're right, and thank you so much for being, tell me your name again.
Reverend Alicia.
Reverend Alicia, yes. But the way Reverend Alicia brought it to us, that what we're saying is that this is the conversation we have to have. Because let me tell you what happens. People still come and sit in our offices and come and ask us questions. And I'm going to tell you one of the things I've learned about preachers that, you know, y'all just have to be honest. I'm one so I can talk about it, okay? You know, 3 words that preachers probably hate to say more than any other words in the vocabulary. I don't know. And when we don't know, sometimes, you know, I mean, my wife will get on me about it sometimes. She will say, why you just say you don't know? I said, because I knew enough to say something about it. She said, but you really didn't know. I mean, that's one reason why sometimes we don't have the conversation. So we need to be as well prepared as we can. So when we're sitting with a person by themselves, let me tell you something. Every one of you in this room thinks, as you're a clergy person, that somehow, because you were called to preach, that instantly made you a pastoral counselor.
No, it doesn't. You went to training for pastoral counselor.
And that's just not true.
There's training.
Not the truth.
And the fact that you would dare prepare anybody.
Everybody's not a counselor.
The fact that you would dare try to prepare anybody for marriage and not be able to talk about issues of sexuality is an atrocity.
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
You have to talk about
I mean, for instance,
the whole
I don't
person.
marry couples anymore without insisting that they have full health exam, batteries of health exams, especially including HIV.
Right.
All right now.
You know?
Right now.
And unlike I don't know who said this earlier today, but let me just tell you this. When you do counseling right, because I always tell people, if you're not married in your heart before you get to that altar, nothing at that altar is going to be magical. You know, that's going to make out, you know, right? I mean, that's just what all we do at the altar is affirm that God is in this,
Yes.
you know, and it's going to be all right, right? But if you haven't had, if you haven't come to that place where all those issues that need to be talked about, and we have some responsibility for that.
Yes.
And so I feel all the time that, I have to talk to couples about things that are but this is what I want to tell you that I heard earlier today. I've had 3 instances where taking those tests has resulted in both or one, in both instances, one instance both, and in 2 instances one of the other, proved to be positive. I have not had one of those situations yet where the couple did not go through with their marriage. Because if you've done the counseling right, You've told them what it means when you sit there and say those words, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. So if you weren't going to deal with the sickness before you said I do, you're certainly not going to deal with it after I say I do. So you might as well know what you're dealing with. Amen. You know, just like you, I insist that they get credit checks and sit down and share them with each other. That's right. I insist on all that kind of stuff. Right. We're being irresponsible. Yeah. We're being irresponsible if we do not prepare ourselves to have those conversations. And then the other thing we have to learn, which I hope we will learn as we have conversations in Rochester, as you have conversations in Rochester, the good news when you don't know is to know who does know.
There you go.
So that you can make referrals.
That's right. That's right. That's what referrals are.
That's what it's about. So that's what we want to work on. That's what we want to work on. Yes, ma'am.
So how do we deal with the fear that a lot of clergy have about talking about these issues of morality and as it pertains to condom use or whatever? Because a lot of preachers are really scared to say, okay, I used to teach an abstinence in an abstinence-only program, and it wasn't my job to say, well, but you could use condoms. Everything else was very thorough, but we didn't go there. And I'm like, we all know, you say the but everybody always leaves the but, ... which is how this whole conversation got going. Yeah. So how do we get, preachers and ministers and anybody, lay leaders, whatever, to get rid of the shame and the fear of going, okay, well, if you don't abstain, we know this is the best practice, but if you don't, then let's, here's the information.
Yeah, but we have to bring people along. It's not always the first conversation that's going to make the change you're looking for. I'm just to give you another one that I'm sure, I use things that people can identify with in the room, okay? In this room right now, there are at least 5 female preacher pastors. And I guarantee you there are at least 5 male preacher pastors who at one point in their life did not believe that there should be female preacher pastors. But they grew. And they came along and have another level. And some of us are still growing. Let me tell you something. Bias and prejudice. Y'all, you remember I had that big whosoever up there? Yeah. I like to think that I got whosoever just flowing through my bones. Yeah. But every now and then, prejudice will show up in my mind. And know what the word prejudice is 2 words, to prejudge. Okay, that's what prejudice is, right? Now, I like to think sometimes, that's what it says, to be honest with yourself about who you are, that I am free of prejudice. Now, those of y'all that know me well know that I fly just about every day of the week. I fly at least 3 or 4 days out of every week. I'm on planes, right? And a long time ago, I got to where I remember the first time I saw a female as one of the pilots. I remember I thought then, that's interesting. But my open-mindedness allowed me to overcome the moment, right? But I had to stand up in front of my congregation and confess something that happened to me about 2 months ago. About 2 months ago, I got on a plane, and when I got on the plane, I looked in the cockpit, and for the first time in my life that I ever knew, there were 2 women.
Yes, oh. Yep, they do. They fly.
And I had to be very honest and say in my heart, I felt a little uncomfortable. When it was one woman, I always felt like it's still a man in there, right? But that's just pure prejudice.
That's right. You're right.
You know what I'm saying? That's just pure prejudice. And all I'm saying to you is that all of us have to grow beyond prejudices. All of us have to go beyond ignorance, misunderstanding, misinformation. One of the points I didn't make in the sermon that I was giving you earlier is that being the right people means that you also have to be a people who are ready and prepared to deal with being misunderstood. Yes, sir. Because in that text, one of the things it says is that they instantly
thought they were drunk.
Thought they were drunk. They've been drinking the wrong stuff. But, you know, people ask you, see, you start talking about the kind of stuff we talk about openly. There are some people in our clergy circles that say, man, what Kool-Aid you been drinking? You know, you've been drinking some of that Blocker Kool-Aid. You've been drinking some of that aged care Kool-Aid. You've been drinking something, which means what they're saying is, you starting to talk about stuff that we don't talk about, and it's a way, not the way we deal with it. But this is truth. And these are things we have to be able to talk about. So all I'm saying to you is that, and I'm still thinking about your question in the way you asked, because I'm saying is you have to bring the people along. Because I've discovered this though, is that when you are persistent in continuing to discuss issues, for instance, I just did the first HIV/AIDS training in one of our Baptist district associations a few weeks ago. They had their district congress, right? And they asked me to come do a training. That's the first time they'd ever had for they only really did it for their younger folks. But I found it very interesting. There were some older clergy who, they know me and they know the work that we do, who were concerned. And they decided to hang around in the back of the room. And I had some of them come up and confess afterwards. He said, you know, I couldn't leave. He said, I mean, some of you have heard me talk, I've heard this before. You know, I tell people all the time about this whole issue of how you get bogged down in the same gender-loving question. I tell people all the time, you don't need to get bogged down in that. You need to leave it up to God.
That's right.
All right? Because it's not about, you know, because people loving each other is really beyond, and how people love each other and why people love each other is really beyond anything that we really completely understand. All right? But I do know this. I mean, just know in the Bible why things are the way they are. Put it in context. I know exactly why all the admonitions against same gender loving people exist in the Old Testament. Because of the simple fact, and a lot of preachers don't deal with this, it would go against the old covenant.
Okay.
The covenant that God made with Abraham said that because of your relationship with me, this man who was old as can be and didn't think he'd ever have children, and a wife that was too old, the covenant said you will have more children than there are stars in the sky and sand by the sea.
Yeah.
The only way you can have a covenant that's built around having more ancestors than there are stars in the sky is procreation.
That's right.
So in the old covenant, all the literature of the old covenant is certainly going to be against anything that I don't care how much a man loves another man or a woman loves another woman, they will not produce a child.
Ain't gonna happen.
I mean, you can love each other, and that's fine. Yeah. But don't think that that's a basis upon which you're going to
Produce children.
procreate. And that's what the old covenant is built around. The new covenant is not built around procreation. The new covenant is built around the love of God and your neighbor as yourself. That's right. Okay? And how that love gets expressed, the key is God in it.
Is God in it?
You know? Now, I haven't got to pass any judgments on that.
That's right, it's already been stated.
I'm not even saying, I'm going to put it to you like this. It's really clear to me Jesus didn't say nothing about it. Okay? That's clear. I mean, you know, and I do Jesus all the time, right? You know, so, you know, I think Jesus was saying we got some bigger issues. I mean, we do, y'all.
So focused on, that's right.
Right. I mean, some of y'all have had me use this example before. You've heard me use this example before, but be clear that you don't allow yourself to get caught up in fringe issues that have us lose the point in terms of what we need to be about in the church.
That's right.
Politically, the best example of that I've ever seen, and those of you who heard me talk before, some have heard me say this one, is I just know y'all in this room. I mean, I'm willing to believe I'm halfway right on this, okay? In the year 2000, I'm willing to probably bet that, you remember that election that ended up being determined by the Supreme Court, right? Between Gore and Bush,
Oh, yeah.
and the Supreme Court made the ultimate decision. Now I'm willing to bet that most of you all in this room did not have a problem in terms of who you thought should have been the president, because it's probably who you voted for. All right? I don't want to make too many assumptions, but I think I know who most of you voted for. All right? But then, what happened between 2000 and 2004 gave us an insight into a political reality that if you hadn't made the decision who you're going to vote for before, by the time the 2004 election came around, you were even more clear about who you wanted to vote for. But the person that you voted for still didn't get to be the president.
That's right.
Right.
Now, the person who you voted for didn't get to be the president because some people who look just like us in the room got caught up on a fringe issue in the state of Ohio that resulted in the election going to the person that you didn't vote for. Do y'all remember what the fringe issue was? Same-sex marriage. So over the issue of same-sex marriage, you ended up with 4 more years. I'm just saying, don't let yourself, we have to think in bigger terms.
Yes, just preach the word.
In bigger terms, that's right. Preach the truth of unconditional love.
That's right.
Preach the truth of redemption.
That's right.
Preach the truth of reconciliation.
The Bible do the walk.
Preach the truth of, of salvation.
Amen. Preach it. Teach it.
Preach that truth, and don't allow yourself to get so bogged down in fringe issues that it keeps you from, there's a man named, I'm going to let you go, there's a guy named Robert Bryant who wrote this book entitled Dangerous Liaison. Dangerous Liaison.
You got it.
It's an interesting book. It actually has a chapter about Metropolitan Church, the church I pastor.
Okay.
But y'all think about this. Dangerous Liaison is a book that this guy wrote years ago. He said, if black folk and people in the gay and lesbian community could ever figure out how to get along, then it would change the whole landscape of politics in the world. It's kind of interesting because all he was dealing with was not sexuality, it was dealing with disenfranchisement, oppression, bigotry, prejudice. So no matter what you think about the issues, you see what I'm saying? If you ever think, and the same thing is true, can you all imagine if Jews and black folk ever truly got along?
We'd be rich.
I mean, what do you have in common with Jews? A history of oppression,
slavery,
bigotry, disenfranchisement. Right. Let me give you another example. What would happen if poor black folk and poor white folk ever got together and realized they suffer for the same reason?
That tornado brought them together.
But you let the color of your skin
brought them together.
Be a divisive factor. You let what somebody says about your sexual be a divisive factor. You let what somebody says about your religion. So what I'm saying to you is that a lot of times the way in which the oppressive forces end up continuing to have dominance is by playing on our prejudices.
Yes.
Now I'm not telling you what to think or how to think. I'm telling you to look at the Word of God and understand that the tradition of God's unconditional love gets us beyond a lot of stuff. Now, last I'm going to tell you on this one, just using the whole theology, is Paul. So some people would say, then why does Paul say what he said? The reason why Paul said what he said was that Paul believed, y'all, that Jesus was going to come any day.
That's right. That's right.
And he was fanatical. That's the reason why Paul would say things like, slaves, be loyal to your masters. Now we hate that. because that was used as a line. But the fact that what Paul was saying is, don't y'all be worrying about being slaves. Jesus is coming and gonna set all that right. 2,000 years have passed.
And it's still,
You see, so Paul was fanatical on that level. Paul was the same way about women. All y'all in this room with your earrings, your necklaces, you know, your rings on your finger, your makeup. You know, Paul would have been upset with all of that.
That's right.
that time.
Because Paul said you should not do it. But guess what Paul was saying that for? Paul said that because he was saying, don't let anything distract you from your focus on the fact that God is coming. Jesus is coming right away.
That's what your life was based on.
So he was saying, don't get distracted by anything. You know, so what we're saying is that we have to live in light of a context that tells us we are what we are today. Y'all not getting ready to take your earrings off. You're not going to put your dresses back down to your ankles. Right. You're not going to stop wearing makeup. Right? Which is all intended, now wait now, which is all about creating attractiveness.
What you're comfortable with.
So if we're going to accept attractiveness on men and women, you know, that dude, what's that dude that's riding around, he's half, you know, the black dude that's driving the world crazy? You know the dude that makes the Old Spice commercials now? Who they say, who they claim is the most sexy man in the world? Yeah. Y'all, that's about attractiveness. I mean, as a business, you know, I mean, why you buy weave? Attractiveness.
Because I want to wear it.
Why do you buy cologne? Not that, attractiveness. So we live in a world where all this stuff is designed to attract you, and we don't take as much time to educate people about how to deal with your feelings because of your attraction.
You said it. You said it.
I mean, it's just about, we got to be honest, y'all.
That's right.
And y'all know they be coming up in church putting on shows. So, yeah, it's enough. Let me quit. But you see, we got to have this conversation, y'all.
Let's give them a hand.
Put on the beauty shows in church.
Before I dismiss them, I want to have all of the executive of the blocker to come up front.
You got half of them in the hallway.
Get them from out there. The executives, y'all please come up. All of them.